person all the time, actually.
Before people text me and complain, look it up. Eagles. It's just Eagles, and the band has always insisted that Radiohead is one word and Adele, of course, is one word. They're all one-word artists. And Irene of New Plymouth, I'm going to send you this beautiful vinyl double LP from Dire Straits.
Oh, thank you so very much. And you have a wonderful day.
Great to chat. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. One-word artist names. There's your Link 3 answer for today. Thanks to everyone who took part and had a go. Let's talk history now. We've got Dr. Grant Morris of Victoria University School of Law standing by in our Wellington studio. Hi, Grant.
Hi, Jesse. How are you?
Good. And a very personal topic for you today.
Yes, I thought, I've been thinking of this one for a while, and I thought, why not do it today? It's a bit of a trip down memory lane where I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my family did as history tours when I was young and how it helped to inspire me to become a historian.
It's something that I think a lot of people listening will relate to. So take us from the beginning, I suppose. Why did your family decide to do these tours, and what did they look like? Yeah,
so we're talking about the period about 1989 through to 1993, so it kind of played out over about 4 years, and so it was when I was in my young teens. And my father decided that when he was young, his parents had taken him for these epic trips around New Zealand to show him the country, that he would take us around. So my mum and my dad and us kids hired a camper van, and we set off on this plan over several years to explore every part of New Zealand. Now, when it started out, it was just about driving around and seeing the sights, as I suppose a standard trip would do. But Dad decided that he'd hand the itinerary over to me as a 14-year-old who had just discovered really history and a love for history. So I took the idea of a general trip around New Zealand, or trips around New Zealand, and turned it into one that was almost exclusively history.
What was involved in a trip like that? And I guess a lot of planning.
Yeah, so 14-year-old who had just managed to get a copy of Maurice Shadbolt's Reader's Digest tour book of New Zealand. So this is the Maurice Shadbolt, the author, and he'd written this amazing travel book a year earlier, 1988. And it had these great details about historical sites and New Zealand wars and things that you wouldn't necessarily get in your classic generic New Zealand travel book. So that was my guide, and I spent months planning for these trips as to exactly where we'd go and where for example, the New Zealand War's battle sites were, or these little-known historical monuments. And we set it all up, and then we went on our way, and on paper, it seemed, very straightforward and smooth, but it didn't quite play out that way in practice.
Right. What sort of logistics were involved?
Yeah, so as some New Zealanders will know, some listeners will know, if they have done similar tours to, for example, the New Zealand Wars, where they've tried to find these monuments, many of them are quite hard to find, quite hard to access, and often in the middle of a paddock on some farmer's farm.
Not like the American South, where there are plaques and statues everywhere to guide you in the right direction.
Exactly, and this is before this, more recent keen interest in the New Zealand Wars that we've seen over the last, say, 5 or 6 years. So some of the sites have been improved since that time, but there wasn't necessarily a lot on these sites. So not only did you have to find them, but Dad had to get the camper van down these dirt roads and these crazy corners, big camper van with 5 people in it. To find all these sites, and so good on him. He got some pretty good driving skills over the 4-year period.
I'm a little bit surprised it didn't put you off a career as a historian.
Well, I didn't have to do the driving, so that was.
Did you have a role? to play?
Yeah, so I was, I developed the itinerary, but I was also the tour guide on the way as well. And I think my family appreciated it, sometimes more perhaps than others. They got into it. We did these amazing things, like we'd go to different battle sites and we would we'd walk them. So we'd say, well, okay, where were the different combatants? What would it have looked like at the time? And sometimes it's hard to recreate that, but we made a real effort to sort of try and bring it alive, and to see things that off the beaten track that people wouldn't always see.
I'm trying to think of which TV family you guys are reminding me of. I think it might be the family from Little Miss Sunshine. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got a more accurate sort of look-alike on-screen family.
Yeah, I mean, it was, there were highs.
I mean, it wasn't the Clampetts.
No, it wasn't the Clampetts. It was quite well organised, but quite hard to implement. And we got better as it went on because, as I said, we divided it up over 4 years. So we had our kind of Northland trip of about 3 weeks, and then we had Taranaki, and then we had the East and North Island, and then we divided the South Island into two. So after a while, it got quite slick. And we knew things to do to prepare.
Who was the least keen member of the family? I ask, having a bit of an insight into the Morris family.
I think it might have been my older brother. On one hand, because he was a bit of an older teen, so he had to go around with his family for 4 years in a camper van.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's got a keen interest in history as well. So. One thing we did do, one of the rules of the tour, wasn't anything to do with history, is that there was a compulsory swim wherever a body of water was located, as long as it was clean, right? So if it was a river or the Southern Lakes or whatever the season, you had to go for a swim. And we kept to that the whole way.
Great. A family that swims together stays together.
Indeed.
Do you think it would work in 2021? Perhaps there's listeners who might get in touch and tell me about their own family historical tours.
I think it would. In fact, I think it would be easier in 2021, partly because there would be more guidebooks who would have more information on the historical sites, partly because the historical sites are better signposted and easier to get to, and some of the roads will be better as well. Also with the internet. Planning on the internet might make things easier. So this is pre-internet this time, and also we're in domestic travel zone at the moment. So if if people are going to spend that amount of time in domestic travel, then this is a real opportunity to do it.
The Griswolds. Are you familiar with the Griswold family?
No.
National Lampoon's European Vacation.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I have seen a National Lampoon.
That would make your dad Chevy Chase.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
It would.
Okay. Did they inspire your career as a historian?
Absolutely. So for me, there are a few things that inspired me, certain teachers and books and so on, but these trips did as well. And I'm very grateful for my parents for doing this because for me, it made it come alive. My country, I could see it, I could feel it, I could walk it. All of these things I'd read about, right in front of me. And so as a very young, teenager, adult, I kind of got in early. So before university and even before senior high school, or around senior high school, I was kind of living the history. And it kind of set me up so well for university and for my future career.
Nice to talk to you. Well done. Great topic.
Cool. Thanks, Jesse.
Grant Morris on family vacations. It's a US word, isn't it? Family holidays here in New Zealand with a historical theme. Let's go to another excerpt from our podcast series, Conversations with My Immigrant Parents. And when 11-year-old Anik left Sri Lanka, she thought it'd be temporary. But almost 2 decades later, she's talking with her brother Navin and mum Sushani about guilt, obligation, and what freedom really means.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Saray De Silva.
And I'm Julie Zul. And today we're introducing the Jacinda family. The Jacinda whānau came to Aotearoa from Sri Lanka, and this episode features mum Sushani, older brother Navin and his sister Anik. Sushani and Navin live in Tamaki Makaurau, while Anik has moved recently to Whanganui.
Before arriving in Aotearoa, the family also lived in Malaysia for 5 years and in Singapore for a year.
When did we come to New Zealand? So 2003. It was April. I'm pretty sure it was April.
I think I was 11 years old or 12.
And yeah, I didn't want to move because obviously I had all my friends and stuff. I put up a fight before we moved. I didn't even want to go.
Yeah.
You threw a tantrum?
Yeah, I didn't want to go proper.
He said, you two guys go,
Yeah.
and then if it's good,
Yeah, but I'm glad now, obviously. But at the time, the first probably 6 months were pretty average.
It felt kind of exciting for me.
Did it?
Because I also thought that it was temporary. I didn't realize how big a change it would be, I don't think, at the time. It was kind of exciting for me.
Yeah.
And then I think maybe you were older through all of these changes from moving from Sri Lanka to Malaysia, and then Malaysia to Sri Lanka to Singapore, Singapore back to Sri Lanka. Maybe you felt like you were just sick of change.
Yeah, I think Malaysia was great, right?
I loved Malaysia.
There's always good memories in Malaysia. Malaysia was just really fun, you know?
Yeah.
That's where I started playing sports, all that kind of stuff. And then we moved back to Sri Lanka, and then we were primary for a couple of years. That was fun too. And then we went to Singapore, and that was miserable. That was terrible.
Why?
It was just hard. We used to get up at like 5 a.m. to catch the damn bus to school.
Yeah.
And then I'd fall asleep in the bus. I just remember being so tired, never wanting to go to school. Then I was in Fat Club, remember that? Because I was fat,
Holy
they'd make
crap,
me...
yes.
They'd like come get you at assembly and make you run around the field. They'd be like, you're in Fat Club. And then...
God, that sounds like
Yeah.
it's from The Simpsons, but it's real life.
This next bit explores how Sushani recovered following her separation. Sushani refers to her mother as Archer. Archie is grandmother in Sinhalese, and she refers to her dad as Daddy.
that was a different kind of freedom actually. Because I
As
didn't
in you
realize.
could hit on other men. As in you could hit on other men.
No,
What do you mean?
I didn't have the inclination after what happened. No. I felt free because I didn't realize how I had to rely on everything on Tati, or maybe he did.
This is a large space for everyone. All right. Welcome everyone. Perhaps at the top I'll just acknowledge that we're here to really kickstart New Zealand's presence at Expo 2020. Of course, plans for Expo 2020 have been postponed, but that means that this event now is well positioned to be a launching pad for countries around the world back into international markets, and that will certainly be the case for New Zealand. Large participation from some of our major exporters, and we hope that this will be a chance to really showcase what New Zealand has to offer in terms of innovation, but also what is unique about us.
Is the Expo even more significant now because we're in this post-COVID phase?
I would say yes. You know, at different points we've had the opportunity for expos to provide an opportunity for New Zealand to launch itself into new markets, for instance. You know, for instance, after the China Free Trade Agreement. This, in a post-COVID world, will be a chance for New Zealand to reconnect with the world. We've done very well with some of our export markets, but now's a chance to make sure that we are entering new spaces and really lifting our profile.
Would you like to see that online like APEC, because APEC has seemed like a bigger reach? Any worries that because of COVID the reach won't be the same?
No, I think that the planning that's gone in means that we will see a mix of both online engagement, but also the Expo has traditionally been about physically participating, physically showcasing what it is your country has to offer. And that's so important for us as a nation. It's so much about how we present face to face. You know, the timing of Expo 2020 should mean that we are in a better position to take part than we would have been certainly in 2020.
Will government and foreign affairs staff travelling to this event be vaccinated before they leave?
Well, of course, you know, our vaccination plan sees at the moment the general population being vaccinated from about mid-year onwards, and so that wide availability will be there. And of course, for the Expo, it's the latter half of the year that we expect people to be participating.
So we've heard that some will be travelling in late April, so you can't say definitively whether they will.
I can't specifically speak to that, but the majority of people, of course, it would be over the course of the latter months of the year after we have general vaccinations open for everyone.
Speaking
Minister, did you want to speak to that at all? Is it?
No, I think we're aware of the danger travelling internationally, very cautious, but as the Prime Minister said, we would expect that by that time many of the people would have had access to the vaccine. They are frontline people, they're travelling overseas, they are at risk, and so there will be perhaps priority given to them if they have to travel.
In terms of priority groups, there's that national significance priority group. Has the framework for that been set up yet?
No, of course, we've talked about that needing to come back to Cabinet. We're still waiting for that to happen. What we've generally said is that we know that there are groups that need to represent New Zealand abroad. You've had examples of, for instance, those who will be participating in the Olympics, but we will need to consider that framework as a whole. Cabinet expects to do that shortly.
Could we have a translation?
I can't give you a specific date, but we're very mindful of, some of the timelines that people are working to. We've just got to make sure that we treat everyone consistently if we do have a special process for those representing New Zealand abroad.
Could we have a Trans-Tasman bubble by mid-April?
I haven't put firm dates because I don't want there to be moving goalposts. I want to present people with some definitive dates that they can plan around. But we have said that soon we are working very, very hard to make sure that we give people as much certainty as possible, and we'd like to see it soon.
So when would we have a timeline by? When would you be prepared to put a timeline
And
out?
look, again, we actually, had given indication of when we wanted to see an opening. We had outbreaks that were laid some of those plans, both on the other side of the ditch and in New Zealand. Our goal, though, is that once we open, to be able to do it safely, to do it in a way that people understand the basis on which we may see short-term closures, and to enable us to have a bubble that essentially sticks.
Is dates anything that you would consider talking about with Cabinet when you next meet?
Yeah, so what we want to do is that when we start talking publicly about those plans, that we can say the date at which we expect the bubble to open. So that's what we want to provide, enough forewarning that people can think about, if they're a business, been preparing for that, but also if they're likely to travel, being able to make those bookings and so on. Yeah, I think the airports would tell you actually the work that has been done, particularly around preparing for quarantine-free travel from, say, the Cook Islands and Niue, which we already have, has meant that we have a level of preparedness. There are some additional things we need to do because of the volume, but I'd say by and large that the airports do have some good, robust protocols in place, and that's what we'd expect.
Does it bubble?
Yes, they could. And this is why, we take so seriously the planning and the protocols we need to put in place. Because Australia is dealing with the equivalent of one state in New Zealand, we're dealing with multiple. And so that means that there is a chance we could have an outbreak that could cause a pause in travel. And so we need to put in place protocols to manage that. And we also need to make sure we give forewarning to people that that may occur.
Have there been further discussions with NZOC and obviously NZC, because the creditors are going to be going to as well, around priority vaccines? What discussions have you had?
Oh, look, I can't speak to some of those. It may well be the case that officials have had conversations to understand timelines that different codes or organisations are working to. But our expectation is that they'll come back to Cabinet with recommendations around how to manage the group of people who will be looking to represent New Zealand before mid-year, because that's, of course, when we'll be generally opening up our vaccine program.
After seeing the America's Cup yesterday, how much of a priority is it for you to ensure the Cup stays in New Zealand next time?
Look, there's no doubt that the Cup has been very special for us this year. It's been a hard year. The team have provided, such optimism and excitement for everyone. But what we need to do is make sure that, we try and be consistent. The government has played a role for successive Cups in keeping the team together, but equally, we need to make sure that New Zealand derives some benefit around hosting. And so those are all the things we keep in mind.
Is that something you're going to go into negotiations pushing, that it stays here?
Yeah, at the moment, of course, for there to be taxpayer investment, we do need to see that benefit for New Zealand. And I think New Zealanders want to see a Cup, if they're investing in it, raced here. But at this stage, it is just too early, really, to go much further than that. We should just let the team celebrate for a bit.
But how do we ensure that it does stay here?
Well, one of the things that we have said is we've consistently, over many years, seen government support the Cup team to stay together. We have some available funds from this last campaign to be able to do that, but that will be contingent on it being raced here.
Do you think tourism New Zealand was
I'll come here and then I'll come back
Do you
over to
think
you.
Tourism New Zealand was wise to spend almost $1 million on the steward event?
Oh, look, those ultimately are decisions for Tourism New Zealand. They are funded and given the support to go out onto the world stage and domestically make sure that we get our domestic tourists moving around, but also that around the world, New Zealand stays top of mind with that opportunity to travel opens up once again. But they make those decisions. It's independent of us.
Personally, though, do you think it was wise?
Oh, look, they are decisions for Tourism New Zealand. I'm not a marketing expert, and so I wouldn't venture an opinion. What I can tell you is that they have been recognised by others for being very good at what they do on behalf of New Zealand.
The 15-year-old boy, Prime Minister, that there's been a story in the news this week, obviously, the 15-year-old being deported from Australia. Would you categorise his leaving Australia as a deportation, i.e. was this boy sentenced to leave?
Well, look, he obviously was deported alongside a number of other deportation cases. And what we've said is that generally, of course, we have issue with the way that deportations, across the board, regardless of age, have occurred, particularly with those who have strong links to Australia, much more so than New Zealand. In this particular case, we have said it is very complex, but it did need to be dealt with sensitively because of the young age of the individual involved.
But you would describe it as a deportation?
Oh, yes, certainly that's how it's been classified with me.
Right,
Yeah.
so you believe that the continued sort of painting of it as a deportation is accurate?
Well, look, based on the advice that I've received, it is under those same conditions that this individual has returned to New Zealand. But again, I would say this case is different in that it is a very young person involved and that it is very complex. But it is fair to say that New Zealand and the team here, particularly from Oranga Tamariki, are doing the best job that they can under the circumstances.
How are
Yep.
talks going on?
I'll give you the last one, eh?
How are talks going on progressing vaccinations to the Pacific? It's obviously logistically hard to get Pfizer vaccine over there.
It is, but what we want to make sure that we're doing with the Pacific is talking to them about their needs, what we can possibly do with a Pfizer vaccine, and making sure that decisions are made alongside our Pacific neighbours. They'll have their own view around their own rollout, their own priorities, and so we really are working together.
So do we still have allocation deals with other companies for their version of
So some of the things that we need to work through is that if we are using some of our allocation for vaccination in other countries, that has to then be worked through with the pharmaceutical company because of the various issues around liability and so on. So it is quite a technical process, but we are going through those steps to make sure that we have options available for our Pacific neighbours.
And so also this we're going to stay at any
We're wide-ranging topics.
Any discussion around agreements and letting them stay through what the government?
Look, I haven't been party to any of those discussions. Okay, thank you everyone.